The sun dipped low over the rolling Texas hills, spilling gold across the wide-open fields of the Wesson Ranch. The air smelled of dust and hay, and the faint bleating of cattle echoed against the wind. Clara Wesson stood by the fence line, her weathered hat shading tired eyes that had seen too much loss and too little mercy. For 3 years she had fought to keep the ranch alive after her husband's sudden passing, a fight that had left her strong, yet quietly hollow. Each sunrise brought new chores, new debts, and new whispers from town. "She can't run that place alone," they said. "She'll sell before winter." But Clara had no intention of giving up the land that carried her husband's name, and her memories. That evening, as the sky bled orange and purple, she saw a lone rider approaching from the west. The man sat tall in the saddle, his figure dark against the horizon. He moved with the slow confidence of someone used to being watched. When he reined in near the corral, Clara's dog, Boone, let out a low growl. The stranger tipped his hat. "Ma'am," he said, voice low and rough like gravel rolling over whiskey. "Name's Eli. Heard you might be needing help before the cold sets in." Clara studied him, the dust on his coat, the faint scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the way his eyes didn't flinch under hers. He looked like a man with more past than future. Still, her herd was too thin, her hands too few, and the season too close to risk pride. "You can bunk in the barn," she replied curtly. "Work starts before sunrise." Eli nodded once. "Fair enough." That night she watched from the porch as he unsaddled his horse and built a small fire near the stables. He moved like someone who didn't expect to stay long. Deliberate, quiet, almost careful not to leave a trace. The way he stared into the flames told her he'd known loss too, the kind that burns behind the eyes long after tears stop falling. The next few days passed in a rhythm that felt strangely new. Eli worked without complaint, fixing fences, tending cattle, and breaking in a stubborn Mustang that no one else could handle. Boone, once wary, started trailing him by the 3rd morning. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words were measured, never wasted. Clara found herself watching him more than she intended, curious about the silence that seemed to follow him like a shadow. At the feed store in town, people began to talk. "That drifter's trouble," one man muttered as she paid for supplies. "Heard he used to ride with the Hawthorne gang. Mean bunch, real killers." Clara said nothing, though her pulse quickened. When she returned to the ranch, Eli was chopping wood, shirt clinging to his back in the heat. He looked up, caught her staring, and gave a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. That night, as the crickets sang and the stars came alive, Clara found him sitting by the fire again. She hesitated before asking, "You running from something, Eli?" He glanced at her, the firelight painting his face in gold and shadow. "Ain't we all, ma'am?" he murmured. "Question is, what are we running to?" There was something in the way he said it that made her chest tighten. The wind rustled through the dry grass, carrying the smell of smoke and rain on the way. For the first time in years, Clara didn't feel entirely alone. Yet somewhere deep down she knew this man would bring trouble before peace. And when he finally whispered, "You'll regret choosing me," she wouldn't know whether to believe it or to be grateful for the warning. The mornings came earlier after Eli arrived. Long before the sun breached the hills, the ranch stirred with motion. The soft thud of boots on dirt, the creak of the barn doors, the smell of strong coffee drifting through the air. Clara would find Eli already awake, tending to the horses with quiet precision, as though the animals trusted him more than they trusted most men. At first, their conversations were few, brief exchanges about cattle counts or weather forecasts. He worked hard, never asking for more than a meal and a place to rest. But slowly, an unspoken rhythm formed between them. Clara would hand him tools without being asked. He'd refill her water canteen before she realized it was empty. They moved like two sides of a coin, different yet in sync. One afternoon, while mending the western fence line, the sun burned mercilessly above them. Clara wiped the sweat from her brow and noticed Eli's hands, scarred, steady, strong. You work like a man who's done this before, she said, testing him. He gave a small shrug. Work's work. Fences don't ask questions. But there was something in his tone, a quiet ache that hinted at a life lived behind secrets. She wanted to ask more, yet she knew better than to pry. Everyone on the frontier had ghosts. Some were just louder than others. That evening, a storm brewed over the horizon. The wind howled across the plains, bending the grass flat and rattling the windows. Clara and Eli raced to bring the herd in before the sky broke open. Thunder cracked overhead and rain came down in sheets. Together they fought the elements, shouting over the wind, herding panicked cattle back to shelter. When a frightened calf slipped near a ravine, Eli lunged after it, grabbing it by the scruff and pulling it to safety just as lightning split the sky. For a brief moment, the flash illuminated his face, drenched, wild, determined. And Clara felt a surge of something she hadn't felt in years. Trust. By the time the storm passed, they were soaked to the bone, leaning against the barn, catching their breath. The air smelled of wet earth and adrenaline. Clara laughed softly, shaking her head. You're either brave or foolish, Eli. He looked at her, eyes unreadable. Maybe both, he said quietly. Then, after a long pause, he added, You'll regret choosing me, Clara. You don't know what follows me. His words hung heavy in the humid air. Clara met his gaze steadily. Then I'll regret it when I have to, she replied. For the first time, he smiled. Not the polite curve of lips she'd seen before, but something real, fragile, almost disbelieving. Days turned into weeks. The damage from the storm brought them closer as they repaired what was lost. Fences, feed stores, and maybe, without realizing it, the walls around their hearts. She began to notice small things. How Eli lingered near the sound of her laughter. How his eyes softened when she spoke of her late husband. How he flinched when someone mentioned the law. One night, over a shared pot of coffee, he told her pieces of his story. Growing up poor, working ranches up north. Falling in with the wrong crowd when debts piled too high. He didn't name the gang, but the guilt in his voice filled in the blanks. I left that life behind, he said, staring into the fire. But it don't always leave you. Clara said nothing, only poured him another cup. Words weren't needed. Understanding was. In the days that followed, their bond deepened in the quiet, in shared work, in laughter over burnt cornbread, in the simple peace of knowing someone else carried a past too heavy to speak of. But as summer began to fade into the copper tones of autumn, Eli's gaze often drifted toward the horizon, wary and distant. Something in the wind had changed, and though Clara didn't know it yet, the peace they'd built would soon be tested by the ghosts riding hard out of his past. Autumn crept over the plains, painting the horizon in shades of rust and gold. The air grew cooler, the nights longer. On the Wesson ranch, life had found an uneasy rhythm, steady, almost peaceful. But beneath the quiet, something restless stirred. Eli had been on edge for weeks. He'd scan the tree line at dusk, linger near the horses longer than usual, and wake in the middle of the night, sweat on his brow, hand instinctively reaching for the pistol beside his bedroll. Clara noticed every bit of it. One evening she found him saddling his horse under the fading light. Going somewhere? She asked, leaning on the barn door. He didn't look at her. Just riding out a ways. Need to check the north fence. The north fence was fixed yesterday, she said evenly. His shoulders tensed. For a moment he said nothing. Then he exhaled and met her gaze. Sometimes I just need to ride, Clara. Helps me think. She nodded slowly, though her heart ached with unease. She wanted to trust him. Had trusted him. But the look in his eyes told her he was fighting something he didn't yet have words for. That night, while he was gone, a rider from town brought a letter. It was from Sheriff Whitaker, sealed and dusty from the road. The note was short, written in the sheriff's hard scrawl. Clara, heard you took in a drifter named Eli. Thought you should know, there's a bounty notice out of Amarillo. Wanted for aiding the Hawthorne gang last spring. Be careful who you trust. Whitaker. Clara read it twice, her hands trembling. The Hawthorne gang. She'd heard stories about them for years. Rustlers, robbers, men who'd left blood and ash in their wake. When Eli returned near midnight, his coat damp with dew and his expression unreadable, she was waiting on the porch with the letter in hand. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw it. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Clara asked, softly but firmly, "Is it true?" Eli's jaw clenched. "Depends on what you've been told." "I've been told you rode with killers," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "That there's a price on your head." He looked away, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "I rode with them, yes, once. Not because I wanted to, but because I had nowhere else to go. When I saw what they were, what they did, and I walked away. But the law don't much care about reasons. They just see guilt." Clara wanted to believe him. The man she'd come to know didn't match the stories whispered in town. Yet doubt coiled like a snake in her chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked quietly. "Because every time I do," he said, voice low and heavy, "people stop looking at me like I'm a man and start looking at me like I'm a monster." Silence stretched between them, thick as smoke. Finally, Clara spoke. "You saved my land. You've worked harder than any man I've known. Whatever you were, Eli, that's not who you are now." He stared at her, eyes shadowed by disbelief. "You don't understand." "They don't forget, Clara. The Hawthorne boys, they'll come for me. Maybe for you, too." Her pulse quickened. "Then let them come," she said fiercely. "I've already lost everything once. I'm not about to lose again because of fear." Eli looked at her for a long time. Then, slowly, almost painfully, nodded. Over the next few days, the ranch carried on, but the air felt charged, like the stillness before lightning strikes. The nights were quiet, too quiet. Boone barked at shadows more than once, and Eli started sleeping near the door, his revolver always within reach. By the end of the week, fresh tracks appeared near the outer pasture. 5, maybe 6 riders. The ghosts he'd warned her about had finally found their way home. The night they came was moonless, black as coal and twice as heavy. The wind had died to a whisper, and the cattle were restless, shifting uneasily in the dark. Clara felt it before she saw it, that strange electric tension that hums in the air before violence breaks loose. Eli was already awake. He sat at the table, cleaning his revolver, the lamplight flickering over his face. When Boone growled low from the porch, Eli's eyes met Clara's. He didn't have to say a word. "They're here, aren't they?" she whispered. He nodded once. 6 riders, maybe more. "I saw their campfire out by Deadman's Ridge." Clara's heart pounded. "What do they want?" "Me," Eli said simply. "They won't leave until they have it." She moved to the window, seeing shadows flicker against the horizon, the faint, jerky glow of torches. "Then they'll have to go through both of us," she said. "Clara, no," he warned. "This ain't your fight." Her jaw tightened. "You brought it here, Eli. That makes it mine now." For a moment, he looked at her like he wanted to argue. Then he sighed, resigned to the truth of it. "All right," he said. "If we're gonna fight, we fight smart." They doused the lanterns, loaded rifles, and took positions. Clara near the porch, Eli in the barn's shadows. The sound of horses grew louder, the jingle of spurs and low laughter carrying across the cold wind. Then came a voice, rough, mocking, too familiar to Eli to mistake. "Eli Carter," the man called. "You thought you could run, boy? Thought you could hide behind a woman's skirts?" Eli's blood ran cold. "That's Pike," he murmured, the Hawthorne gang's right hand, a man whose soul was darker than the night itself. The riders came into view, torches blazing like devil's eyes. Pike grinned beneath his hat. "Come out, Eli, we ain't here for her, unless you make us be." Clara raised her rifle, voice sharp as glass. "You set one foot on this land and you'll be leaving it in a box." The men laughed in a cruel, ugly sound. Then one fired a shot and the world exploded. The battle was chaos. Gunfire cracking through the still air, horses screaming, the smell of gunpowder thick as smoke. Eli moved like a man who'd fought this war 100 times before, quick and precise. Clara fired from the porch, every bullet sent with steady purpose. A torch hit the haystack by the barn, and within moments flames roared to life, lighting the night in angry orange. Sparks flew upward like stars breaking free from hell. Boone barked furiously, darting between shadows as Clara reloaded. Eli took a hit to the shoulder but didn't falter. He dropped 2 men before Pike caught him across the side, sending him sprawling into the dirt. Pike raised his gun, smirking. "Should have stayed gone, Eli. You always were too soft." But before he could pull the trigger, Clara's rifle cracked, a perfect shot that dropped Pike where he stood. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of burning wood. When the smoke cleared, only Eli and Clara remained standing, bruised, bleeding, alive. The barn was half gone, and the smell of charred timber hung heavy in the night. Eli sank to his knees, pressing a hand to his wound. Clara ran to him, catching him before he fell. His breath came in shallow bursts. "I told you," he rasped, voice barely audible. "You'd regret choosing me." Tears blurred her vision. "You're wrong," she said fiercely. "The only thing I regret is that I didn't choose you sooner." He smiled faintly, a soft, broken smile that still somehow carried peace. The fire burned through the night, devouring what it could, sparing what mattered. By dawn, the lawmen from town had come to take away what was left of the Hawthorne gang. The sun rose slow and golden, spilling over the ruined barn, the scorched earth, and the 2 figures standing hand in hand at the fence line. The storm was over, but the cost of surviving it would linger in their hearts for a long, quiet while. Morning came slow and soft, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The sky blushed pale gold over the blackened remains of the barn, where smoke still curled lazily into the cool air. The worst of it was over, but the echoes of gunfire lingered like ghosts in the wind. Clara stood on the porch, her arm in a sling from a graze she'd earned defending her home. She watched as the sheriff's men loaded the bodies of the Hawthorne riders into wagons. The earth was scarred, the fences broken, the air heavy with ash. Yet somehow the ranch still stood. So did she. Eli lay inside, pale but alive, his shoulder bound tight in fresh bandages. The town doctor had done what he could before riding back to town, leaving a warning that the next few days would decide whether Eli lived or died. Clara hadn't left his side since. She sat by his bed now, the faint light from the window spilling over his face. For a long time, she simply watched him breathe. Every shallow rise and fall of his chest felt like a small victory. When his eyes finally fluttered open, she caught his hand and smiled through tears. "You're awake," she whispered. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry. She poured him a little water and held it to his lips. After a moment, he managed a rasp of a smile. "Still here, huh?" "I told you I don't give up easy," she said softly. He studied her face for a moment, the bruise along her jaw, the dirt still smudged on her cheek, the strength in her tired eyes. "You should have left when I told you," he murmured. "Would have been safer." She shook her head, her thumb brushing gently over his knuckles. "I've spent half my life safe, Eli, safe and alone. I'd take danger with you over emptiness without you." He tried to laugh, but winced from the pain. "You always did have poor judgment," he teased weakly. Clara smiled. "Maybe, but I think I chose right this time." Outside, the ranch hands she'd hired from neighboring farms began rebuilding what the fire had taken. The hammering echoed faintly through the air, the sound of hope piecing itself back together. As days passed, Eli grew stronger. He insisted on helping, even when he could barely lift a hammer. "You're supposed to be resting," Clara scolded one morning. He grinned, leaning on the shovel. "Reckon I'm just not made for lying still. Besides, this place needs 2 stubborn souls to keep it running." By the end of the week, the barn stood again. Not as tall or as fine as before, but proud all the same. When the last board was nailed and the final gate hung, Clara stood beside Eli, watching the sun set over their land. The fields glowed amber and endless, and for the first time in years, the horizon looked like promise instead of loss. Eli turned to her, quiet and uncertain. "You really don't regret it? Choosing me?" She looked up at him, the light catching in her eyes. "I only regret not choosing you sooner," she said, voice steady and full of warmth. He smiled then, not the guarded smile of a drifter, but the easy, open smile of a man who'd finally found his place. He took her hand, calloused fingers intertwining with hers, and together they stood in the fading light, the past behind them and the land stretching out before them like a second chance. The wind carried the scent of fresh hay and rain. Somewhere, in the distance, Boone barked, chasing the last of the shadows away. Clara leaned her head on Eli's shoulder. "We've got work to do tomorrow," she said. Eli chuckled softly. "Then we best get some rest tonight." The sun slipped beneath the horizon, and the stars blinked awake one by one, scattered across the sky like blessings. For the first time in a long, long while, the Wesson Ranch felt alive. Not haunted, not hollow, just alive. And as the night wrapped around them, warm and peaceful, Clara knew she'd been right all along. Sometimes the most dangerous choices are the ones that save you.